Welcome back, everyone. I'm Bob LaLiberte from theCUBE Research, and I am thrilled to be joined by an incredible panel. We've got Dave Vellante, founder, CEO at theCUBE, Zeus Carafalla, principal analyst at ZK Research, Raju Penmetsa, the CTO at FabrixAI, and Shailesh Manjrekar, the Chief AI and Marketing Officer at FabrixAI. Now, in this session, we're going to dig into the market forces and the research that's shaping this next era of AI operations, including discussing the findings from multiple reports like the MIT Enterprise AI Study, Cisco's AI Readiness Report, and research from theCUBE and ZK Research focused on enterprise networking and AI operations. Let's start with the readiness question. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology study, the Gen AI Divide, State of AI in Business 2025, they came out and said 95% of enterprise AI pilot programs failed to deliver measurable financial impact in financial returns or P&L impact. Thus, only 5%, you could infer, actually achieved some kind of meaningful ROI from their AI initiative. Now, Cisco's AI Readiness Report says that, that AI maturity and AI adoption really matters, and that the most AI-ready organizations are 4 times more likely to move their pilots into production and 50% more likely to see measurable value. So that's some really interesting data points that we really want to discuss. Now, Dave, I want to turn to you first. You talk a lot about the AI narrative versus the AI reality. What's really going on here?
Hey, Bob, thank you for having me here. You guys look great out in Palo Alto. Greetings from our Boston studio. I'll throw another data point in there. Our friends at ETR did a survey recently. It was about an N of 1,800, so significantly larger than the MIT survey, but I'll caveat saying it was really IT folks and the CIO crowd. But they asked the question about sustained ROI at scale. And so the outcome was a little higher, probably double, 10 to 12% said they were getting sustained ROI at scale. So it's better, but still, relatively low. And I think, coding has been the killer use case in terms of productivity so far, but that really hasn't translated broadly into the macro. And I think there's some real challenges in harnessing AI beyond, say, coding and getting productivity. And it comes to the data. It seems to always come back to the data, doesn't it? Obviously, there are governance, security, and privacy concerns, but restructuring the entire business around AI and agentic is non-trivial. So the research that we've done shows you got to pick the right use case. You got to identify areas where data is clean and can be harmonized and trusted, and the desired outcomes are very clear. And so the bottom line today is, I think, Bob, enterprises are hitting singles, I'll say. So the size of the benefit might not be there, but I think that's going to change over time, and then we'll see it at the macro economic level.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and like I had mentioned earlier in the sessions, that there's not going to be a lot of fast followers, right? It's going to be really critical to get moving quickly, and we're starting to see organizations do that. So I think that's important. Zeus, I want to turn to you because you've seen this movie before with cloud and networking transformation. Are there any parallels that you see that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think, Bob, it's a good question. The closest parallel to me is really the rise of the internet. And frankly, I think studies like this in a way really are, I'm not going to say irresponsible, but they shine a light on the wrong thing. I think, like the internet, and I remember being in corporate IT in the early days of the internet where, a CEO of the company would come to me and say, we need to have an internet strategy, and they weren't really sure what they wanted to do with the internet. Was it put statements online, let customers transact business? And we went through a lot of trial and error before we found the right use cases. But if you look today, right, you fast forward 20 years, and the internet is embedded into every aspect of what we do. There's not a company out there that doesn't leverage it in some way, shape, or form, and AI is going to be the right thing. And so I would rather see studies focus on the positive aspects of it, where companies are getting benefit, and using that as lessons learned to help drive adoption. I think what we're missing right now, Bob, is some really good lighthouse accounts that help prime the pump to help companies understand what's possible. Because what the Cisco report showed was 13% of companies are getting, the pace setters are getting value. And so let's focus on those, understand what they did, and use that as a way to set best practices versus releasing a report that could scare some people and have them pause. The point you made around there's no fast followers is a good one, because I think this technology is going to move faster than the internet did.
Yep.
But I think where the parallels with the internet come in is we went through an awful lot of trial and error before we figured out the right use cases, and then, like I said, you roll the clock ahead and it becomes embedded into the fabric of everything we do. The AI is going to be the same way. We won't have chief AI officers in 10 years because it just becomes a natural part of business. But focus on the right use cases, to Dave's points.
Yeah. So sorry about that, Shailesh, that you won't have a job in 10 years. But we're gonna make sure for the time being that you are able to conduct with
the
us.
chief emerging tech officer.
Yeah, no, I think, and it's a good point that you make. And the other interesting piece of that is that when organizations are successful and are gaining a competitive advantage, they might not want to share. So it's that double-edged sword of, hey, there's the blueprint for getting value, but some of those early adopters may want to keep that a little bit closer to the vest. Raju, I want to turn to you because obviously there's a lot of technology involved in this. From that standpoint, where do you see them breaking down between that prototype and production phase?
Basically, whether you call it as a prototype or a production phase. And earlier, one of you touched upon the main thing is you provide a curated data. There is no enterprise which has a curated data. If you see some of the researchers and studies, they have a ton of data which is in the islands of 50 or north of 50 different islands, or 50% of them uses more than 20 plus tools that produces a different set of silos of data, and you're giving a curated data for your prototype or POC with a very selective use cases that is giving you the results what you wanted to see. When you roll this into enterprise, and enterprises are complex in nature first, and these different data islands and bringing it together into a cohesive data set where you can make a comprehensive decision on it is overlooked in your POC stages. That's why you're not getting the results what you're looking in a complex environment. And there is always a solution to solve that one. And I see that as the biggest problem or biggest obstacle our customers are seeing today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We hear that all the time, that data issue, right? Getting the appropriate data is a struggle for them. Shailesh, turning to you, you're out there working with enterprises all the time. What's the biggest operational barrier that you're seeing?
Yeah, no, Bob, I mean, that's great, right? It's a great question. So, I mean, there are a lot of these claims and counterclaims. We have MIT, BCG, you guys cited Cisco, right? And there are some hits and misses with these studies, right? So the hits are, they have really unraveled, right, what I've been calling the AI value gap, right? So there are a lot of these AI projects going on, but there are really very few top-line outcomes which are derived from this. And that's because of if you look at the MIT study, for example, it talks about shadow IT. It talks about, the systems not able to be able to learn. They are not able to have memory. They are not embedded in existing workflows, right? So those have been some of the kind of right identifications of challenges. But the biggest miss with some of this, or for that matter, most of them, is really that they are ignoring what we call the operational intelligence world, right? Most of these studies are focused on the business intelligence world. And when it comes to operational intelligence, it's a very different world out there. You are dealing with real-time data, you are dealing with alerts, time series data, and so on and so forth. That's where we focus on, and through this session we'll unravel those challenges and outcomes. But that's kind of the missing piece what I see in some of these studies.
Absolutely, that sounds great. Now, the other piece around AI is that AI has been around for a while, and even AIOps has been around for a couple of years now anyways, right? So automating workflows with machine learning and so forth. Now we're getting into a phase where we're seeing agentic ops, where AI agents can act autonomously across all these systems. What does that evolution really mean for enterprise operations? Zeus, if it's okay, I'm gonna turn to you to get us started here. How do you define this shift?
Yeah, well, I think if I were to sum up the shift in one word, Bob, it's agency. Yeah. Right? AIOps, I think, gave you the intelligence, the what and the where and the why, if you will, to inform a human operator and make that operator smarter and make decisions faster. Agentic ops, though, gives the system the authority and the capability to actually act independently towards a goal and then execute on that goal. So it's really the shift from co-pilot to co-worker is a good way to think about AIOps to Agentic Ops. And so Agentic Ops moves IT from a model where AI is being used as an advanced analytic tool to an actual digital operator. And that's a pretty significant shift, because a lot of what we do in corporate IT is a lot of mundane tasks that are very repetitive. They tend to become very error prone because they are so repetitive. And so if I can have an agentic agent take care of those mundane tasks, now that lets my operators, who frankly are pretty highly paid, do a lot of tasks that are a lot more strategic and transformative in nature.
Yeah, I really like that concept of the digital coworker.
Yeah.
Right. So the agentic, they're not taking your job, they're helping you do your job a lot better. They're getting rid of all of that mundane tasks that you always didn't like to do, so you can focus on the strategic enablement.
Yeah, at Cisco Partners, the conversation we had with G2, you and I had with him, he made a good point. He said AI is actually moving from a thing where we're thinking, holy crap, it's going to take my job, to holy crap, I can't do my job without it, right? And that's a pretty significant shift.
Absolutely, that's definitely going to be important for organizations. Raju, I want to talk to you, because while it sounds great, I'm going to have this digital worker helping me out, doing all this stuff. What are the technology enablers that make this possible, right? There's got to be orchestration, policy, feedback loops. Can you give us an idea of what's going on in the background?
Yeah, I think to make any agentic operations or AI ops to agentic operation transformation, the way we are addressing in Fabrix.ai is we provide 3 fabrics. One is our data fabric, which is the plumbing fabric for all of your different data sets you have, dynamically bringing together the data of different types with the enrichments and that dynamism in that nature for a system to query that data. Then your AI and basically applies the reasoning on top of it to give you an action, which is addressed by using our AI fabric. Then the automation fabric is the one acting upon it to execute that in the given environment, whether that is your production or a cloud environment or a data center environment or an edge environment. That's how we are bringing all these things, bringing together. The most important thing is AI is a co-enabler for you for that, with that reasoning and everything, versus giving you a decision or giving you insight for you to act upon it. That's how we are seeing the shift from AIOps to the agentic operations.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, Shailesh, then how does FabrixAI operationalize all this at scale?
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? So, I mean, if you look kind of step back, right? So the main difference between AIOps and agentic AIOps is really what I call the last mile problem, right? So with AIOps, it was really about somebody interpreting a ticket and looking at a dashboard, right? Whereas with agentic ops, you're putting the LLM or the agent at the center of the decision making, right? And these are agents which can reason, they can contemplate, they can deliberate, right? Take actions, chain of thoughts, and so on. But what that really means is you got to have the right building blocks, right? LLMs are just a means to an end. So the way we basically operationalize this, I mean, that is one of the major value proposition what Fabrix brings to the table is through a framework what we call agent ops or agentic ops, right? So taking right from an prompt or an intent to taking the right, the AI personas involved to the MCP tools, right? And being able to provide the right guardrails, right? Which is extremely important because these LLMs have a tendency to hallucinate, right? Obviously. So as much as there is promise of LLMs, you got to have the right guardrails around it to be able to implement this at an scalable, right, enterprise scale level, right? And that's kind of what Fabrix does.
Excellent. No, that sounds good. Dave, I want to turn to you and see, how does this fit into the broader trends that we've been tracking as well?
Yeah, I love this conversation because I think if you go back and look at the legacy category of IT ops, has always been a good use case. And of course, now the new legacy is AI ops. It's good because this is heavy lifting, right? Undifferentiated heavy lifting, as Andy Jassy would say. Now, as we get into agentic ops, if you want to close that AI value gap, as Shailesh was saying, and Raju, you brought in the reasoning conversation. That's a huge ROI opportunity, but there's a big but in my view. Obviously, you need the telemetry data. You got to bring it in quickly and cost effectively. You've got to be able to bring that from many, many sources. Yeah, that's the time series piece as well. The big but to me is that data has to be harmonized, it has to be normalized. The semantics and the context have to be captured so that it can be trusted and served up to the agentic, layer, those agents. And unless you solve that problem and address that, you don't want to give agency to these AI robots, if you will. So you have to really think that through. That's the foundation and the building block. I think these guys are right on that you need to establish before you turn it over to the AI, and then and only then are you going to see the type of returns that you would expect.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense as well. In the research that Zeus and I did, we found that a lot of that data fragmentation, a lot of the network complexity are among some of the top barriers to scaling AI, especially as those workloads become distributed across the edge, the cloud, and even private data centers as well. And a lot of the reports that have been out point to that same issue around data gravity. Dave, you were touching upon this as well, but how big of a problem is that today, and what needs to change in how we move and manage data in an AI-first world? And so, Dave, you were just talking about this, so I'm going to come back to you. But from a business perspective, how does data locality shape competitiveness?
Right. Yeah. So, Bob, I mean, data fragmentation is a big problem, but it's also the reality. Data has gravity. We say that all the time. By the way, in this agentic world, process has gravity. So we have to bring process into the equation and understand that part of the whole process logic, is part of the equation. But the reality is the world is distributed, data is distributed. So what needs to change? I mean, I think about architectures. I think the architecture has to be such that you can process data where it lives. In other words, do data ops at the source. To paraphrase Einstein, I like to do that. Move as much data as you need to, but no more.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I've never heard that Einstein quote, so I like that. And like I said, data is certainly going to be important, especially as we get into inferencing and so forth. Raju, I want to turn to you. I mean, how does FabrixAI abstract or orchestrate these distributed data environments?
The whole point behind that is the most important point John highlighted is, does the data need to be moved from where it is? Because you have data in cloud, in data center, and edge. And in Cloud Fabrics, when we talked about 3 different data fabrics, when we plumb that one, we really do not need to move all the data. Through MCP, we have the ability to plug in different types of data without moving the data all the way to the location, number 1. Number 2, and the key pairs and what are the important attributes the system figures out and provides it so that it is an iterative process, it requests what it is required. That's how we are putting a smart cache in place so that it does not need to have the bigger cache there or the context, the right size context. That's how we are solving it in Fabrix.ai, and that's what we think is the right approach to do it rather than pulling all the data in to replicate into somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's so important. That distributed concept, that distributed architecture is really going to be, it's pointing more and more to that's going to be the solution that's required. Zeus, we've also talked about scale across architectures. And so I'm wondering how you see networks evolving to accommodate these AI environments.
Yeah, it's a good question, Bob. And actually, we could probably do a whole session on just scale across, right? It's the ability for a network to connect. Well, let's start back to a lot of what Dave talked about, right? So initially, when I started talking to companies about their AI strategies, they were trying to centralize all their data. Very quickly, they realized that's just not possible. You have too much data in too many places. And when you think of the way data and AI have kind of evolved together, and compute for that matter, when we think about, and what Jensen calls the single unit of compute, we've gone from a server to a rack to a data center. Now companies are storing data in multiple data centers and even out at edges. And so if I'm going to apply AI, I need to apply it to all my data. And if that data is in geographically different locations, I have to have all those geographic locations look like one logical unit of compute. And so the network now plays a really important role in the success of AI in that it's the thing that connects our data to our GPUs regardless of where they're located. And so this is a relatively new concept, right? So with networks, we've always thought about scale up, scale out. Scale across is the ability to connect multiple data centers in geographic locations. I mean, sometimes, Bob, like across the country, right?
Correct.
And I think in the future across the globe. But that requires ultra low latency, lossless networks, that can operate at GPU speeds. And so it literally looks like you're in one physical location, even though you're geographically dispersed. And I think it's one of the great innovations we've had in networking, over the past couple of decades. We've never been able to do that before. And I think it's just, Ethernet's gotten to a place where it's so good and so fast. Cisco's last chip, 51.2 terabytes in silicon, right? It's just, that was unheard of before. So I think it's one of the great innovations that's going to allow us to take AI and scale it globally like we never could have before.
Yeah, I agree. It's really exciting to see what's going on in this networking space. It's great to see that third dimension coming into it. So again, it's not just scale up and scale out, but scale across as well.
Well, what's been fascinating too is the UEC was supposed to solve some of these problems, and it's been a little slow. But all the vendors have come out with their own solutions, and so the network industry is marching ahead, just really fast, and that's good to see.
Yeah, absolutely is, absolutely. Yeah. So before we leave this question, Celeste, I just want to go over to you. Are you seeing data gravity as the bottleneck or as an opportunity for innovation?
Yeah, no, I think this is by far the most important question, right? So there's always going to be data gravity, right? Because for a company or an enterprise, that's their IP, really, right? Yep. How we work around that is through federated data management, right? So as Raju was alluding to, the data fabric by far is one of the most important innovation what we have in our platform, right? And what it does is it kind of takes care of what I call the data value gap, right? It consolidates the silos, it provides you data quality, right? And all of this with kind of low skills, right? So because this is a low code environment, you can put these telemetry pipelines which are really low code. And what we do is it's not just gathering the data, right? Because there's a lot of insights in operational data, but you got to mine it in the right way. So what we do is that contextualization of that data through our real-time topology discovery. We don't depend on a CMDB, right? And more importantly, once we have this in our RDAP, what we call our data fabric, we layer it on top with a semantic layer, which is by far the most important thing, because now the agents, right, they can actually read this, right, without any hallucination, right? And that's one of the kind of real value add what we provide from a platform perspective, right? And what's our key secret sauce when it comes to our agentic platform.
Excellent. Yeah. So it sounds like again, those new architectures are going to be required to be able to overcome these bottlenecks and get us to that next stage of adoption. One of the other things that came through really loud and clear in a lot of these reports is, the need for governance. And a lot of leaders saying they're ready, but lack that real AI transparency and control. So I'd like to dig into how we maintain trust when autonomous agents are making decisions. And what does observability or explainability look like in an agentic ops framework? So Raju, I'd like to start with you and what does responsible automation look like from an engineering standpoint?
Okay, when we talked about AI Fabric, Bob, and that gives you a certain set of things to give you the right slice to the right set of people. And when you get into the compliance and who has access to it and who's supposed to see it, who's allowed to see it, who's allowed to access it. And in FabrixAI, AI Fabric, and we provide guardrails, and that controls what is going to be allowed, what is not going to be allowed, what is the guardrails for a given slice of data for a right context. And also we give the data privacy, which kind of hashes the one-way or two-way. Mostly it is going to be two-way useful for you, because when you send the data to the LLM, you hash out the safety data or secure data to the LLM so that they don't know. When you get it back, you don't even know that one. When those two are combined, we are giving you that governing principles of giving the right data, and based on who's consuming it, what needs to be given, how it needs to be provided, what needs to be shown, what needs to be hashed out.
Got it. Yeah, I like that, having the right data at the right time for the right purpose.
Yeah.
Shailesh, turning to you, how does FabrixAI make these decisions auditable and transparent?
Yeah, so see, this is the most important aspect, right? When you are what I call is a stochastic trust problem, right? Because these are really stochastic processes when it comes to LLM. So by far, I mean, when we call ourselves an agentic platform, agentic enterprise grade platform, we have this kind of, the building blocks and the guardrails in place. And what are those, right? So for example, MCP is turning things on its head, right? So we have about 320 MCP tool sets. When you send 320 tool sets to an LLM, it's bound to hallucinate. So for that, what we have is what we call prompt templates, right? Which provide you a little bit of determinism. So we pride ourselves in saying, hey, we are really deterministic agentic orchestration, right? That means there is some structure to it, but then we leave things to the LLM, right? So that's the most important thing. Beyond that, we have AI personas, which, everything is driven by an AI persona as to how much data it has access to, what tool set it has access to, right? Same thing with guardrails, right? On top of that, we have observability and explainability at every step of the way, right? I really call this as the new agentic operating model, right? Which is based on these 4 or 5 pillars, right? There has to be trust, there has to be governance, there has to be observability and explainability, and there has to be security. So this is built in our platform, which is what makes us call it an enterprise-grade platform.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I've always talked about the time to comfort with these new technologies and how people are able to validate it. And certainly having that governance, having that transparency is going to accelerate that time to comfort with these technologies. Dave, I'm going to go over to you now. What do you think the enterprises need to hear to regain trust in AI outcomes?
So some of the things that I'd like to pick up on that I'm hearing in this discussion, I mean, to me, everything is changing. The operational model, the business model, the technical model. The fact that you don't need a single CMDB to be successful here is super important. Shailesh was talking about a data value graph, and that's the world we're entering, the world of not, database strings, but things that people understand. So the expressiveness of a graph, but the ability to query data that, as simply as it might have been in a CMDB, but I don't need that. So to double down on what folks have said, auditability and transparency are critical. Repeatability, and because non-deterministic AI is often not repeatable. That's those hallucinations that we always talk about. So part of the magic is how do you blend deterministic AI and non-deterministic in a way that can be applied appropriately. And I'm hearing that's what Fabrix is doing. And so I think architectures and processes that demonstrate that repeatability can learn from the reasoning traces of humans, because humans are going to be in the loop here for at least the foreseeable future, and can learn from those exceptions and then come back and automate that. That is increasingly going to build trust, because that's kind of the holy grail that organizations want to see.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Zeus, how does observability and explainability converge in an agentic ops world?
Yeah, I don't think it's a question of how does, but it must converge. In fact, I think it's one of the strengths of the FabrixAI solution. So to me, the coming together of explainability and observability is really creates the foundation for trust, governance and auditing. There's something called hierarchical tracing, in which what observability does is it's able to trace the entire path of the agent's decision, understanding why it made the decisions it did, what data it had, and it creates almost that observability across that entire decision loop, right? And I think without that, then we're a little bit blind. So we're going to want to know how many tokens were used for the decision, if there was model drift, where hallucinations came from. And in all these conversations we've had, we've talked about the importance of governance, but if you don't have the observability to be able to understand why these decisions were made and whether these guardrails were actually enforced or not, then in a lot of ways we're operating blind. And Bob, you brought up the whole point of how do we establish trust? Well, we establish trust by understanding why the decisions made, the agents made, were made, right? And so, like I said, I think it's really a strength of the Fabrix product. I just want make a point here too on observability. There's a lot of vendors that provide observability, but they do so really just using metrics and logs and some traces, and it's got to expand past that. We really have to get down into understanding that entire agent workflow. So I do expect observability to go through a big evolutionary step here with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Observability for the AI era.
Yeah. Well, it's just AI has transformed every other part of IT, right? It's going to change observability too.
Absolutely. So I know a lot of the research that's out there has highlighted that some of the biggest barriers to AI readiness isn't necessarily technology. It's actually the people and culture, right? Just human nature and getting that to change. So I want to delve into in this next section on what changes are going to be needed within organizations to ensure successful AI operationalization, if you will. Is it new roles, new processes, or even just a new mindset? Dave, let's start with you. I've heard you often say that digital transformation is more about a mindset than machines. How does that apply here?
Well, some of my earlier comments, I was talking about the macro and the productivity. I was interviewing Eric Brynjolfsson recently. He was a former MIT professor, economist, and he's now at Stanford, and which maybe a step up. So he was talking about, typically these markets move in S curves, like an ogive. He was talking about a J curve, like really kind of exponential. And so why is that? It's because this whole AI wave is about scaling without labor, and that scares people, understandably. So I think it's very simple, Bob. I mean, I think if you can show people the path to better productivity, better ways to work, solve their pain, and people are going to buy in. And there's going to be some consternation, but ultimately, if you show them that it's going to, as you guys were talking about earlier, make their jobs easier, make their lives better, that is going to overcome some of those cultural hurdles.
Got it. Yep, that makes sense. Zeus, what new roles or disciplines are emerging? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I don't know. What about your crystal ball here?
Of course.
I do think new roles are going to appear. In fact, at Cisco's AI Summit earlier this year, Kevin Solomon, the CEO of Goldman, he said something interesting. He said, if you look at every one of these big technology trends, they've done three things. They've eliminated jobs, they've raised productivity, and they've created an order of magnitude more jobs on the back end, right? And I think you'll see something similar here. A lot of the jobs that we have today, hunting and pecking on a router, working with iOS or answering mundane calls, things like that are going to go away. And while I think a lot of these new jobs are yet to be determined, I do think there are some starting to emerge. So for instance, I've talked to companies that are trying to create a job like a human AI collaboration manager that designs workflows and ensures that there is some linkage between people and agents, and so they're not being replaced by them, but they fully understand how to leverage them. Orchestration engineers are another job where they're able to build and maintain complex multi-agent workflows, and they allow agentic operations to actually do the things they need to do. I think there's also, from a training perspective, AI fluency educators within companies that can provide a lot of the training. And so we're going to create a whole series of jobs that are uniquely AI, right? Just like we have jobs today that are uniquely internet or uniquely cloud, right, that we didn't have before. But I think this whole concept that AI is going to eliminate jobs or create a net decline in jobs, I think that narrative is completely wrong. I think we're going to see productivity go way up, and that's going to drive more jobs. And I think if you're in the workforce today, the one thing I can say is keep yourself open to new jobs, because you want to keep your skill set current. So when we're on the other side of this transition, your skills are where they need to be able to capitalize on these new jobs, and you're not part of the old guard that, frankly, is all these legacy jobs that are going to go away. So.
Well, for someone without a crystal ball, that was pretty darn good.
Yeah.
So, Sulesh, turning to you, how's FabrixAI helping organizations upskill their workers and helping them to abstract some of the complexity of that?
Yeah, so there are really two questions, right? So one is about the upskilling part, right?
Yeah.
And I'll take that first. So it's really about this human AI interaction, right? How do you make that easy, right? There is also some organizational change management, as you guys been talking about, right? The very fact that now the level 1 engineer can not focus on level 1 versus he can do more of level 2, right? Yeah. Whereas the mundane task can be handled over by the agentic AI agents, right? So that's a kind of a huge improvement. So that's one aspect of it, upskilling. The second aspect is how do you democratize this, right? Yeah. So for example, in our Copilot, you can just provide conversational phrases to kind of, write these agents, take some actions, right? Formulate answers to your commonly encountered use cases and so on. So that's huge, right? So that's really the part of, the upskilling part. Okay, and again, comes back to what I keep calling, in order to make that upskilling easy, you got to follow that AI, value gap, right? Or that AI operating model for that matter, right? Where you are basically abstracting a lot of these things, right? The complexities in terms of infrastructure, in terms of data, in terms of governance. How do you abstract this from the operational personas? Right? And really, I think, the value I see with Agentic is really, obviously, the productivity gains is the low-hanging fruit, but it's really about how these personas can work on launching new business models, right? So that's where they are able to now spend more time, right? More strategic operations and so on and so forth, right? And that's where the abstraction has been such that it is absolutely easy for them to basically, launch these agents, right? Create these agents, deploy them, and scale and so on, right? So as you heard probably Jensen say, right, that pretty soon all the IT, IT folks are going to be HR departments, right? Where there'll be onboarding agents, they'll be kind of doing performance review for them, and then eventually retiring them, right? Yeah. So this world is changing, and then obviously we are smack in the middle of all of this.
You bring up a good point, but I'm curious, do IT pros want to be the HR department of the future?
Well, that's what they're going to be relegated to for the most part, right? Again, it's not from an operational perspective. Now they can choose to do a lot more value-added things when it comes to strategic operations and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and in that, it's a good question, but ultimately, anytime there's massive change like this, it requires people to be able to change and be adaptable to that change. Yep. And so they can move forward with it. So it'll be something we'll all be watching and seeing how well people are adapting to it and moving forward.
Well, the one thing I can tell you, Bob, is we've seen this movie play out before.
We have.
And those that were not adaptable to change wound up with early retirement. So
exactly. Exactly. Raju, to close out this question, where do you think automation can safely replace that manual human-in-the-loop tasks?
Basically, if you take that as an example, if we started off this conversation with AIOps to Agentic Ops, and in any of these cases, there is a mundane task taking most of the time of the people. And when the system is taking all of that automated and giving you make an action, if you take AIOps as a world where one of our customer and one of the large service provider in the world, and completely L1 is automated to the point where L1 people are doing L2. How did they transform the people in that case is, and they got the time to upskill themselves to support the L2, and that is a transformation for an organization if you're in services, right? And when you are doing the complex things, and it can give you human in the loop, so that the system gives them the ability to make a decision whether it is accurate or not, rather than crunching all the numbers and coming to that and hallucinate at that point. Even as a human, we see the same numbers again and again, and we make mistakes too, right? And that's how we are seeing this whole thing turning out to be. And I also agree with Ju's point of this is going to create net new jobs, and people need to change, as well as the operational procedures need to change, like any transformation. All these three are equally important.
Yeah, so I think the overarching theme of this last question has been people need to embrace the change, really lean into it, figure out how they can upskill through their vendors, through themselves, self-learning, even using AI to learn about AI, right? To be able to, and I think that the cool part is for this technology transition, it started with the consumer. So I have a much stronger hope that this will happen much more quickly, because people are used to using AI at home, and now it's being brought into the workforce. So they won't be as frightened by it. There'll be that comfort level already, and they'll just need to work through those specific operations and how that happens. Unfortunately, we are at time, but this has been a great discussion. So thank you all for all your insights. You know, and to me, a few themes really stand out. You know, the AI readiness is somewhat relative. Data, people, and culture remain some of the biggest constraints. And operational trust will define who truly succeeds in this next phase of AI. And with that, let's shift from research to reality. And up next, we're going to take a deep dive into the FabrixAI platform, including live demos and showing what Agentic Ops looks like in action.